Episode 3 of the Hard Platinum Trophy series is finally here. This is a series where I'm going for the hardest Platinum Trophies on PS3, PS4, and PS5. And coming into this entry, I had 6 out of 40 games finished after expanding the list at the end of the last video. In that last video, I achieved one of my hardest and proudest Platinums, Devil May Cry 5, so my confidence coming into this one was at an all-time high. The feedback I've gotten from that last video showed me that you guys either enjoy watching me suffer, or you enjoy watching someone conquer hard gaming challenges. Unfortunately for me, suffering has been unavoidable for some of these Platinums, but in the end I've gotten through each one so far. So naturally, I channeled my inner masochist and raised the stakes again, and today I'm attempting not just the first 10 out of 10 difficulty game of the series, but the first two 10 out of 10 difficulty games back to back. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. With this being the third video in the series, you already know how this works, so let's dive right in and see if my recent experiences playing hard games would pay off and allow me to conquer this challenge. The Metal Gear franchise is another that I'm ashamedly unfamiliar with. It's a series with a long, rich history that goes all the way back to 1987 with the first Metal Gear on the MSX2. What the f*** is an MSX? Now, I've been around for a bit. I'm old, okay? But I had never heard of an MSX before I went down the Metal Gear rabbit hole for this video. So this was even before my time. The series clearly went through many changes over the past almost 4 decades and is now responsible for some of the best video games ever made from a storytelling and gameplay perspective. My first exposure to the series was when I rented Snake Eater way back on PS2. It must have been the mid-2000s, and I was fascinated by how deep the stealth and camouflage mechanics were. I could wear green and brown camo and use it to hide more effectively in tall grass. It was probably my first experience with stealth mechanics that were deeper than simply just sneaking up behind somebody to incapacitate them. Unfortunately, the few days I had rented the game for didn't allow me to get very far in the game, and Metal Gear would fall off my radar as I gravitated towards other classic PS2 titles like God of War and Grand Theft Auto in the early 2000s. Fast forward to 2015, shortly after getting my first PS4, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes would come to PS Plus as a free monthly game. This felt like a perfect opportunity for me to revisit the series I had neglected for so long. Unfortunately, I could not get used to the controls. I can't remember specifics, and maybe I was missing something blatantly obvious, but I do remember being turned off by the controls and thinking they felt completely different from every other third-person action shooter I had played up until then. And since I wasn't really invested in the series at all, I just didn't care enough about the game to adapt to the change, so I abandoned it after just a couple hours. Fast forward another 10 years to late 2024 when I was thinking of games to add to this hard Platinums list. I still didn't know much about the Metal Gear universe, but I had heard whispers about a PS3 era game that was exceptionally difficult to platinum, and that game was Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. I knew it was rated a 10 out of 10 difficulty, and I have been prioritizing PS3 games over the past few years. I also knew it involved a different protagonist from most of the other Metal Gear games, and that it was generally considered to be an offshoot. This is another reason I was willing and excited to tackle this game for this series. I didn't need a PhD in Metal Gear lore to understand what was going on in the game. It's also one of the hardest Metal Gear games, supposedly, to get the platinum in, so I knew it would prepare me well for the other high difficulty games in the series if I ever decide to go back and complete the rest of the games. Coming off the Vanquish Platinum in November and the Devil May Cry 5 Platinum in March, and recognizing the similarities between those games and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, this felt like the perfect time to jump back into the Metal Gear series and earn this challenging platinum. If there's one thing I've heard over and over about the Metal Gear universe, it's that the overarching story of the series is very difficult to follow. It's convoluted and confusing in true Hideo Kojima fashion, especially in how the different games connect to one another. For that reason, I won't even attempt to provide a comprehensive backstory on the Metal Gear universe as a whole. There are probably many videos on YouTube that cover the lore and history of this franchise in great depth, considering how popular it is. Fortunately, I think I can give a basic story rundown of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance without having to rely on past entries. You play as Raiden, a lethal, highly trained cyborg that makes all the other Metal Gear protagonists and most video game characters period look completely benign and underpowered. Raiden's cyborg body has multiple enhancements that make him a formidable combatant. You can move at super speed and slice enemies into 100 pieces in a matter of seconds. You have the strength of thousands of adult men and juggernaut level endurance and stamina. And you're constantly ragdolling enemies, including those that are the size of buildings. Raiden was the main protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 2 and also makes an appearance in Metal Gear Solid 4. Rising opens with you in Africa, working for a private military company called Maverick on a mission to protect the Prime Minister of an unspecified African nation. When the Prime Minister is taken, Raiden attempts to rescue him by fighting a host of soldiers, cyborgs, and machines. Raiden takes an early L, and your rescue attempt doesn't go as planned. Raiden then shifts his efforts towards trying to stop Desperado, the private military company responsible for the Prime Minister's assassination. Desperado is full of hyper-violent cyborgs just like Raiden, who are hell-bent on sowing discord through whatever deadly means necessary. Halfway through the game, Raiden discovers Desperado is spawn-camping orphans to turn them into combat cyborgs for their war plans. The plan involves brainwashing the children through VR training and then implanting their brains into cyborg exoskeletons to create efficient killing machines. Raiden, a former child soldier, is understandably pissed off and goes on a mission to stop them with some help from his former colleagues at Maverick. What follows is a one-man crusade that is exciting and violent every step of the way. Raiden is a morally conflicted character. He clearly has some semblance of a conscience, but also recognizes his own brutal nature that he can't escape. At the start of the video, I semi-seriously proclaimed myself a masochist for playing these hard games, but Raiden is a legitimate masochist who literally derives pleasure and joy from his own physical pain and uses it as fuel to inflict pain on Desperado. You get the sense that Raiden is still motivated in some way by good, and he uses his incredible abilities to help save the lives that he can. We've seen the archetype before: Kratos in God of War, Max Payne, hell, even Carl Johnson from San Andreas. The deeply flawed protagonist with a troubling past who's trying to fight the dark nature inside themselves and do the right thing. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance references many real-world historical events that had real-life war consequences. Events such as 9/11 and the war in Iraq are mentioned briefly, and I don't think this is new for the series, but some of the dialogue in this game felt completely surreal. The writers of this game were also clearly obsessed with memes.
Memes, the DNA of the soul.
But they aren't referring to the multi-panel pop culture reference jokes that we commonly refer to as memes in the modern age. The writers use the term in the game as it was originally used by renowned evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in the 1970s to describe ideas that permeate across time and space. Ironically, some of this dialogue on memes predictably ended up becoming actual internet memes on Reddit and elsewhere.
Now there's a pretty meme. Exquisite.
All that to say, there is some entertaining, timely, and thought-provoking dialogue in Revengeance, which is refreshing for a game that is this action-focused. A lot of action-heavy games fail miserably in their story or dialogue, but Revengeance provides a satisfactory narrative experience that doesn't detract from the rest of the game. I can't compare it to other games in the series, but the story in Metal Gear Rising is interesting enough to keep the player engaged between the intense combat sections. Speaking of combat, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record here, the gameplay is really where Metal Gear Rising shines. I've said that about many of the games in this series already, but truthfully all of the games in this series that I've played so far have just been incredibly fun to play, and Revengeance maintains that trend. This is a third-person action game that plays like a hack and slash for most of the experience. In the same vein as Devil May Cry, Revengeance was made by Platinum Games, the same studio that made Vanquish, and you can instantly see the similarities between the two games. Both games bleed hypermasculinity and emphasize fast-paced combat, with some slow-motion mechanics and over-the-top set pieces mixed in. Just like Vanquish, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is also a pretty short game. Revengeance felt slightly longer, especially after all the cutscenes are factored in, but these are still both very short games, taking only 4 to 6 hours of actual gameplay to get through. That said, there is not a lot of wasted time with Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Every few minutes you're thrown into a new combat encounter. This is a game that respects the player's time, and there's enough variation between encounters and enemy types to where a playthrough of the story doesn't feel repetitive or stale. Where Vanquish kept the focus on gun combat, in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, you're mainly using a sword alongside secondary weapons like grenades and rocket launchers. The rocket launcher might sound like a go-to weapon, but it's actually pretty underpowered compared to Raiden's melee attacks. Raiden's sword is his primary damage dealer, and Revengeance has a unique mechanic called Blade Mode that lets you quickly slice repeatedly in multiple directions to deal intense, focused damage against enemy armor. Everything else slows down in Blade Mode, which makes it seem like Raiden is moving at super speed. I haven't seen anything quite like Blade Mode either before or since playing Revengeance, but it's the perfect way to demonstrate Raiden's speed and allows the player to feel overpowered while playing with him. Raiden has a health bar and also an energy bar, with energy being used for Blade Mode. While in Blade Mode, enemies can be executed with a Zandatsu maneuver when they take enough damage to armor and health. A small red square will pop up around the center of their body, and when sliced with Blade Mode, it lets Raiden rip out the enemy's spine, which completely replenishes health and energy. The Zandatsu execution is a key component of combat in Revengeance, and is crucial for maintaining health and energy levels. It will also provide a brief moment of invincibility, so it can keep you alive during an intense fight with a large number of enemies that are constantly attacking. Some of the VR missions will force you to use Zandatsus to defeat all the enemies, so you'll become very familiar with this mechanic. Blocking and parrying will also be important, not just for avoiding damage, but a perfectly timed parry can open enemies up to massive damage, which makes challenging combat encounters much more manageable. Learning enemy attacks and their parry windows will be a must if you intend to earn this game's platinum. Blocking and parrying is a bit weird in this game, however, it's done by aiming forward towards an enemy with the left stick and pressing square, which is also the attack button. This can take some getting used to. Most games that have a block or parry mechanic do not map it to the attack button. Other common mechanics from hack and slash games are also present in Metal Gear Rising. It's not as combo heavy as a game like Devil May Cry, but it still involves a lot of button mashing to maximize damage output, and like other popular hack and slash titles, Raiden can pause in midair for extended aerial combos. Both Vanquish and Revengeance have a button that lets you move at superhuman speed. In Vanquish, you can quick slide, and in Revengeance, you can ninja run. Ninja running is an automated parkour mechanic where Raiden will quickly climb walls, vault over obstacles, or slide under obstructions automatically while running. He'll also auto-deflect basic gunfire with his sword, which looks badass. I found ninja running to be vastly more fun than the quick slide in Vanquish. Contrary to its name, ninja running does not really involve any kind of stealth. Stealth sections in Revengeance are limited and usually optional, which make it stand out in a series that has long prioritized stealth mechanics. Stealth can even be detrimental in Revengeance, since it can lock you out of certain combat encounters. It's an annoying but kind of cool feature that actually makes logical sense. If you stealthily kill all the enemies in an area, none of them have the ability to call in reinforcements. Unfortunately, some of these reinforcement combat encounters are required for a trophy later on. Even though stealth feels like an afterthought in Revengeance, they still found a way to make it look and feel badass and fitting for someone of Raiden's capabilities. Raiden also has an AR visor that allows you to see enemies through walls, a la Batman from the Arkham games, and this helps with trying to get the jump on enemies. They've also brought back some iconic Metal Gear stealth-oriented props like the cardboard box that can be used to sneak past certain enemies throughout the game. I sense this was mostly used as a fan service callback to previous games in the series, as opposed to a viable game mechanic, because it's clear this is a game that was not made with stealth being the primary focus. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock 3 main weapons in addition to your sword. Each of these weapons is used by a different boss, and once you beat the respective boss, you can purchase the weapon, its upgrades, and its abilities, and use it for future playthroughs. Each of these weapons has its own advantages and disadvantages, and you'll likely need to use all 3 of them at some point while going for the S ranks. There are also sword and costume variations that can be purchased through the in-game store that provide different benefits, such as a sword that slices through armor like butter, or a costume that increases attack damage or attack speed. Some of these variations are purely cosmetic with no real impact on gameplay, and others provide substantial benefits that will turn the platinum from borderline impossible to manageable. Most of the unlockable weapon and costume variations have some kind of drawback. A sword or costume might provide you with an attack boost, but it also increases the amount of damage you take. However, this ends up not being as big of a deal as one might think, since you have to complete a large portion of this game without getting hit once on the hardest difficulty for the S-Ranks trophy. There are also wigs that can be unlocked that, when worn, provide major benefits. One wig gives you unlimited secondary ammo, which would be your grenades, rocket launchers, etc. A second wig gives you unlimited energy, which is incredibly useful because roughly halfway through the game, when your energy meter is full, you can activate what's called the Ripper mode. Ripper mode is similar to the other rage modes that you find in video games, usually hack and slash games. Think of Kratos' rage mode in God of War, or Devil Trigger mode in Devil May Cry. These modes tend to share similar features across different games, buffing your character's speed, attack, or defense, having some kind of gauge or cooldown timer, and being upgradable. It's meant to be used in bursts, and many players naturally would save this kind of ability for a boss fight or another tough section. Metal Gear Rising's Ripper mode makes light work of most trash mobs and even trivializes certain parts of some of the boss encounters. So you can see how having unlimited energy can make things significantly easier. All in all, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance was genuinely one of the most fun, unique, and downright cool games I have played in a long time. The first thing to know about Metal Gear Rising's difficulty is that the hardest part about earning this platinum is the fucking camera system. Now, this was mostly just an issue in the VR missions. If this game had a fixed camera system, I think it would be a 6 or 7 out of 10 difficulty at most. Unfortunately, the one major blemish on this game is a camera system that auto-adjusts when you approach walls or other obstructions. Now, that's not to completely discount the intended difficulty of this platinum. There are still some challenging requirements to meet. For starters, you'll have to S-rank every mission on Revengeance difficulty. Revengeance has the hardest difficulty, where you can die in one hit if you don't have any repair paste, but you'll need to avoid damage in most of the fights in order to obtain the S-ranks anyway. In order to S-rank a mission, you need to S-rank every individual combat encounter in the mission, including the missable encounters and the boss fights. This is much different from the S-ranks in, say, Devil May Cry 5 or Armored Core 6, where you only need to S-rank the mission, and it doesn't matter how you do on each individual combat encounter. In those other games, you can have a bad start to a mission and make it up later on. In Revengeance, every single encounter needs to be S-ranked, so you'll need to be near perfect the entire way through. You'll also need to do all encounters in a mission on a single go, meaning you can't get S ranks on 9 out of 10 encounters in a mission and then replay the mission to S rank the 10th encounter. You need to S rank every encounter in the mission consecutively, including boss fights, in order to get the S rank on the mission. Thankfully, you can see what rank you get for an encounter before the game autosaves and overwrites your progress, so you can quickly restart that individual encounter if you don't snag the S rank. You can also make a copy of your save at the main menu after each individual S rank, so that way, if you fail to earn the next S rank and the game autosaves, you can just revert to your backup save and try the S rank you failed again, instead of having to redo the entire mission. Some of the combat encounters in this game are quite challenging and will take some practice. That took like an hour and a half. But enemy spawns are consistent across the temps, so most encounters boil down to just learning the spawn points, learning enemy attacks, and taking them out as quickly as possible without taking damage. Easy, right? Not every single fight requires no damage, but the majority will, unfortunately. Ironically, the first mission is one of the hardest because you don't have any upgrades, you don't have any repair pace, and you can't use any alternative weapons. But if you can make it through that first mission, you'll know what to expect, and the game will open up additional options to make the other missions easier. Besides the S ranks, there's only one other trophy that might be problematic for the platinum, and that's for setting the high score in all 20 VR missions. VR missions have made an appearance before in the Metal Gear series, and they're essentially combat scenarios that range from very easy to very hard. One might require you to just kill all the enemies, while another might require you to kill all enemies using only Zandatsu executions. Some of these are set to easier difficulty, while others are set to Revengeance difficulty. And then some of them are short, like 25-30 seconds, while some others take 10 minutes. So there's a decent mix of variety and difficulty with these. There are a few that will test your abilities and require some practice. VR Mission 18 is widely considered to be the hardest and will be the platinum stopper for a lot of players. It's 5 waves of enemies on Revengeance difficulty in a fairly small arena, which is where the poor camera system will really start to generate some frustration. Most enemy attacks are a one-hit kill. You'll have to be crisp with your blocks and parries and avoid a constant barrage of incoming attacks. Some of these missions will be highly skill dependent and will take some practice for sure. The camera system really f***ed me over so many times in these VR missions, including mission 18. Just look at this attempt and see how the camera adjusts right before I need to parry. I managed to get number 18 done in about an hour and a half, but mission 19 ended up taking me almost 3.5 hours. That took 3.5 hours almost. So with the S ranks and the VR missions, is this game really a 10 out of 10 difficulty? I have to say no personally, even with the awful camera system. Now, this is undoubtedly due to the fact that I've been playing a lot of hard games lately, including games like Devil May Cry 5 that are both hard and similar in gameplay style. For that reason, I think my scoring here will be a little skewed compared to somebody who's not familiar with hard hack and slash games. However, the game provides you with some very overpowered items, and the ability to make a copy of your save and restart from checkpoint in order to maintain your S ranks makes this platinum entirely achievable. There are 2 or 3 really hard VR missions, but they didn't take me days or weeks to beat like some of the S ranks in Devil May Cry 5. And so with that, I would give the Metal Gear Rising Platinum an 8 out of 10 for difficulty. Seasoned gamers will be able to get through it with practice, but it may be frustrating for those who lack experience in the hack and slash genre. I already mentioned 2 of the most difficult trophies for earning an S rank in each mission and for beating the high score in the 20 VR missions. Those will account for the majority of struggle one might experience while going for this platinum, but there are a few other trophies worth noting. You'll have to beat all 5 of the main bosses on hard difficulty or above without taking damage. This sounds daunting, and yes, it will take some practice, but you're going for no damage anyway on Revengeance. Getting a no damage bonus in a combat encounter is the easiest way to pretty much guarantee an S rank. These bosses can be tricky to learn. Some of them deal chip damage, or they have quick attacks that are hard to dodge or block or predict. Monsoon, for example, does this smoke bomb attack that deals a very tiny amount of damage, and it's quick, so you don't have a lot of time to avoid it. Sundowner is another boss that can be tricky to no-hit because he's got a helicopter behind him that's constantly shooting at you. And of course, Senator Armstrong, which is already a tough fight, may require some additional practice to no-hit. Another trophy requires you to listen to most of the codec conversations in the game. This is by far the most tedious trophy in the game. In the start menu, you can call your allies from Maverick, along with some other NPCs that you meet throughout the game. Depending on where you are in the game, these calls will provide different conversations, and there are a lot of them. Some of them will occur during boss fights or combat encounters with new enemies, so you literally have to pause the game at the start of a fight, call all of these NPCs, and either sit or listen to their dialogue, or do what I did and hold triangle to skip through it all. I had to follow a guide on Steam for this one actually, because even though I was calling them a lot in my first playthrough, I still didn't get the trophy, so I had to do another partial run to get the rest. It's not a hard trophy, but it is a lot of dialogue. Even if you skip all the dialogue, it'll still take a few hours to access and skip through all the conversations. There are some collectibles you'll have to find and some miscellaneous trophies in certain missions, but these are fairly simple, especially if you're using a trophy guide. The last thing you'll have to do is unlock and purchase all base game weapons, costumes, and wigs, and fully upgrade them. That isn't too tedious. You'll earn plenty of in-game currency to purchase them all without having to do much, if any, grinding. Guides will surely be useful for anybody pursuing this platinum. Metal Gear Rising is a very linear game, so all collectibles and miscellaneous trophies could theoretically be earned naturally, but a guide will certainly speed things up as some of them are well hidden. Listening to all codec conversations will be much easier following a step-by-step text guide. Guides will also be useful for the harder VR missions and for the S ranks. If you're a hack and slash pro or love this game so much that you're willing to spend dozens of extra hours on it, which is totally understandable because this is a fantastic game, you might manage to get this platinum without relying on strategy guides, but me personally, I have way too many games to get through, so I absolutely watch some video guides for some of the boss fights and some of the VR missions. Following a text guide for the S ranks will also give you some insight on what specific criteria are required, such as time limit, number of Zandatsu kills, combo length, and so on. So is Metal Gear Rising a top 10 hardest platinum? I think so. I don't think it's a true 10 out of 10 difficulty, but I do think it's harder than some of the games I have on the back end of my top 10 list from November. I think it's safe to put it in my top 10, but I don't think it would crack the top 5. It's possible this game felt much harder when it came out, and now that it's over a decade old and the internet is flooded with strategies for beating all the hard parts, I think this is another PS3 game that may have gotten easier over time, especially when compared to some of the hard games that have come out since then. Getting the Platinum will have you beating all the missions on the hardest difficulty while playing basically perfect for the S ranks. You could theoretically S rank the lower difficulties as well since they are separated. There's no way in hell I'm doing that, but I think it would be fair to include that in a true 100% completion run. There's also a collection menu inside the main menu that has some interesting things to see. There are a bunch of titles which are given for doing miscellaneous things like beating the story in under 8 hours or earning a certain amount of points during a playthrough. I looked up the full list and some of these are insane, like beating the game on Revengeance without dying in less than 3 hours, or beating the game on hard without dying and without using a single repair paste. I could actually see these being a really fun challenge, knocking them out one by one, so I might keep this in my back pocket for later. Also in this collection menu are the 30 cyborg officers whose left arms you ripped off for the Big Fan of Lefties trophy, and the other collectibles such as the men in boxes and the data storage drives. In terms of DLC, there are 2 story-based DLCs that are, at the very least, worth a playthrough considering they are free and they supplement the main story of Metal Gear Rising pretty well. There are no trophies related to S ranks for these, thankfully. The Jetstream Sam DLC has a very tough trophy called You're Hired for beating Senator Armstrong again on hard without getting hit, except this fight is much harder than the fight against Armstrong in the base game. This trophy took me a good 2.5 hours to earn. His attacks are much quicker and he's a lot more aggressive, giving you fewer and shorter openings to go on the offensive, so you'll be doing a lot of dodging in this fight. I used Sam's taunt ability to do more damage, but as a result I couldn't block because when you taunt with Sam, they deal damage to you even when you're blocking. This trophy is probably harder than most of the base game trophies, except maybe those for completing all the S ranks and VR missions. Other trophies in this DLC include completing it on Revengeance in less than 1 hour, which isn't too hard, and for killing 100 enemies using Sam's quick draw attack. The second free story-based DLC lets you play as Blade Wolf, the dog, the robot dog. You'll also have to beat the final boss of that DLC without taking damage on hard, but that wasn't nearly as hard as the Jetstream Sam DLC. For the 100%, you'll also need to complete it on Revengeance in less than an hour, and get 30 kills with the Wolfblade's Hunt ability, which is pretty much just a stealth kill from behind. And last but not least, the DLC VR missions. Add 30 more grueling, demanding VR missions, which are even harder than the base game ones. There's only 20 in the base game, and this DLC adds 30 more and they're harder. Like the base game, you'll have to earn the high score in each one for the Hero of the Metaverse trophy. It took me about 10 hours to get through all of them, and about 6 of those hours were spent on 3 of the last 4 missions, so they get really tough at the end. These 30 missions felt like they should have given me a second platinum. They were pretty tough, but just like the base game, a good chunk of this difficulty is due to the awful camera system. There were a couple that you have to do in the dark, which is just bonkers, like why don't I just wear a fucking blindfold? So yeah, the 100% generated some real frustration, but if you do it right after the base game, it won't be as bad, and just like the base game, it's just a matter of practice. You keep practicing, eventually you'll get through them all. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is an absolutely fantastic game. I think it exceeds Vanquish in every way, and I have nothing but high praise for Vanquish. The music is great, the action-packed combat is exciting, and the story is adequate to supplement the rest of the game experience. And this is a game that I will remember for a long time. The camera system is wonky as hell, and the blocking and parrying controls are weird and occasionally frustrating, but this is overall an extremely fun game. It's over the top, it's ridiculous, it's entirely unbelievable, but it's fun as hell to play, and at the end of the day, that's what really matters. The Platinum Trophy experience will generate some frustration due to the difficulty of some of these S ranks and the VR missions, which can lead to a less than enjoyable Platinum experience if you're new to hard games or hard Platinums, but I wouldn't put it at the top of the list in terms of difficulty. There are certainly harder games out there, even within the same genre. If you haven't given this cult classic a try, I highly encourage at least a casual playthrough if you're a fan of the Metal Gear franchise, or if you just enjoy high-quality PS3-era action games. As if I hadn't already subjected myself to enough torture, game number 2 in this entry is Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. This Platinum is on the list for one reason and one reason only, and we all know what it is: the Mein Leben trophy. I remember when this game first came out in 2017 just how much talk there was around the Mein Leben trophy. Even before the game officially released, Trophy forums were riddled with players speculating about what this trophy might entail. Some players noted the ease of which the platinum for the previous 2 games could be earned, so surely this meant that Wolfenstein 2 would be on the same level of difficulty. Other players were quick to note that the previous entry in the Wolfenstein series, Wolfenstein the Old Blood, did have a Mein Leben difficulty, though it wasn't required for a trophy. It worked similarly to Wolfenstein 2, a permadeath mode on the hardest difficulty. 1 life, no saves, no checkpoints. Dying means you start all over from the beginning. Since there was no trophy tied to it, most trophy hunters didn't know or care much about it. We certainly were not playing this mode voluntarily just for fun. Then Wolfenstein 2 came along and gave trophy hunters a big f*** you and said, not only are we going to make Mein Leben required for the platinum, but we're going to make it a fucking bronze trophy. I bought Wolfenstein 2 about a week after launch, which is incredibly rare for me to buy a game that new, but I had a ton of fun getting the platinum in Wolfenstein the New Order a few years earlier, and I'd also eventually get the platinum in The Old Blood. But Wolfenstein 2 was looking really good based on the trailers, and the Mein Leben trophy wasn't scary enough at the time to deter me from getting the game. So I picked it up and immediately started on the I Am Death Incarnate difficulty. I only lasted about an hour before I got stuck and said, "F*** this." By this point, I was well aware of the Mein Leben trophy and how difficult it was supposed to be. The game was still pretty new and fresh. In-depth guides for Mein Leben didn't exist yet, and the strategies weren't as well known as they are today. This was back in 2017, and even though I was pretty deep into trophy hunting by this point, I wasn't going out of my way to pursue hard platinums. I was trying a lot of games around this time, and I specifically remember I bought 2 other games at the same time, Final Fantasy 15 and Horizon Zero Dawn. I ended up playing the ever-loving shit out of those other 2 games, and Wolfenstein 2 kind of fell off my radar. I always intended to come back to it, but in the back of my mind, I'll be honest, I did feel a little anxious when thinking about the Mein Leben trophy. My plan was to wait a bit until some established strategies were developed, so that way instead of spending hundreds of hours learning the run myself, I could just study a guide and learn it that way. Now that I'm actively pursuing hard platinums, I had to make sure this one was on the list. And truthfully, when I decided to pick Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and Wolfenstein 2 for this video, I went in fully expecting Metal Gear Rising to be the harder platinum, but I could not have been more wrong. The Wolfenstein series is an alternate history saga where the Nazis have access to supernatural technology and end up winning World War II. There are at least 10 unique Wolfenstein games going back to Castle Wolfenstein in 1981. Like most video games in the 80s, early Wolfenstein games did not have much of a story. In the early 2000s, video games became more modernized and realistic with the proliferation of home gaming consoles, and stories in video games started to get deeper and play a bigger role in the overall gaming experience. Wolfenstein games were developed by a variety of different studios since '81, perhaps most notably id Software in the early 90s. I never played any of these early Wolfenstein games, even though I have been gaming since the early 90s, and I didn't get my first taste of the series until the mid-2010s. In 2014, the Wolfenstein series was handed off to Machine Games to make Wolfenstein: The New Order as their first game, along with a follow-up prequel, Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, which was released in 2015. 2 years later, they released Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus. While The Old Blood was technically the game that released right before Wolfenstein 2, chronologically, the events of The New Order are actually what precede the story of Wolfenstein 2, so it's the most relevant here. At the end of The New Order, our protagonist William Joseph Blazkowicz, or BJ for short, gives the order to his allies to nuke the compound of top Nazi general Wilhelm Death's Head. BJ, who is still in the compound after an intense endgame fight with Death's Head, is ready to sacrifice himself for the mission. Death's Head was not just a general, but also a doctor known for his horrific experiments on those the Nazis deemed subhuman. And BJ understands the importance of his defeat in the overall war against the Nazis. Death's Head is a long-standing villain of the series, and Machine Games molds him into an all-time great video game villain in The New Order. They would eventually do the same with Frau Engel in Wolfenstein 2. Death's Head and Engel are truly vile, despicable villains, even for Nazis. They are evil personified, and are some of the most hateable villains I can recall facing in a video game. In Wolfenstein 2, we learn that BJ's allies managed to rush in via helicopter and scoop him up before destroying the compound at the end of The New Order. Set 5 months later, Wolfenstein 2 leads off with BJ undergoing life-saving surgery on the Eva's Hammer, the Nazi U-boat that he and his allies are hiding out on. While BJ is semi-conscious, we experience some of his childhood in the form of flashbacks, where we can see interactions between BJ and his mother and his father. Speaking of villains, BJ's biological father gives Frau Engel a run for her money in this game for most hateable character. You'll understand why in the first 8 minutes of the game. BJ wakes up from a coma after surgery to learn that the Nazis just boarded the Eva's Hammer and are trying to retake it. BJ manages to crawl to a wheelchair and using a machine pistol is able to repel the Nazi forces for now. We're reintroduced to Frau Engel very soon after as the game elevates her to the role of primary antagonist and villain. Right off the bat, she deals a major blow to BJ and his allies by viciously killing their leader, Caroline. BJ is able to escape, of course, and the early parts of the game revolve around BJ and his allies trying to pick up the pieces after the loss of their leader. Missions in Wolfenstein 2 focus on growing the American resistance against the Nazis by recruiting some new allies to the cause as well as attacking strategic Nazi bases. You'll visit a handful of American cities like Manhattan, New York, Roswell, New Mexico, Mesquite, Texas, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Like the New Order, where BJ visits a Nazi base on the moon, Wolfenstein 2 is also heavy on the sci-fi elements, bringing BJ to a Nazi outpost on the planet Venus, where the Führer himself is stationed. Over the course of the game, BJ overcomes insurmountable odds to push the Nazis back, liberate America, and eventually defeat Frau Engel. Wolfenstein 2 won Best Action Game at the 2017 Game Awards, and was also nominated for Best Narrative. The story is strong enough to complement the gameplay, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's a tad over the top in spots, though not to the level of Metal Gear Rising. The game's story is elevated by the sadistic nature of Frau Engel and the build-up towards her ultimate defeat at the end of the game. It's a game that feels satisfying to complete because of the stakes. Failure means forfeiting America to the Nazis, and victory means getting to put a hatchet through the face of one of the most despicable gaming villains in recent memory. The Wolfenstein games that were developed by Machine Games, specifically the New Order, the Old Blood, and the New Colossus, all play pretty similarly. I haven't played Cyberpilot or Youngblood yet, and I'm not sure if I will, but the other three are first-person action shooters with tons of stealth options and multiple ways of approaching combat encounters. In Wolfenstein 2, as you approach each combat encounter, you'll come across air vents, high-up vantage points, and breakable barriers that can be used to approach the encounter in different ways. Some of these paths allow you to sneak past enemies and bypass the encounter altogether. Other paths might give you access to more armor, health, or weapons that can make the encounter more manageable. The early Wolfenstein games were some of the first ever to have stealth mechanics, and Wolfenstein 2 will have you walking on eggshells as you try to stealthily take out Nazi commanders in order to avoid alarms. Let's talk about Nazi commanders for a minute, since they are a central component of the game's combat. Many combat encounters will have one or two Nazi commanders. Nazi commanders will call for reinforcements if you are spotted, and their proximity to the player is shown at the top of the screen the second you enter the encounter boundary. Nazi commanders can turn a fight against 5 or so Nazis into a fight against a whole platoon of Nazis, which can include stronger enemy types like super soldiers and robotic dogs. Robotic dogs, yes, you heard that correctly. I did mention there were some sci-fi elements to this game. But the Nazi commanders themselves, thankfully, are just normal men that are pretty easy to kill if you can reach them without being spotted first. Normal soldiers can also alert the commander, who will call for reinforcements. And if an enemy spots another enemy's dead body, they'll go into like a soft alert status where they can spot you much easier. Once a soft alarm is active, it's much harder to avoid being spotted, and chances are an alarm is going to go off pretty soon. Going the stealth route in Wolfenstein 2 changes this game from purely a high-octane first-person shooter into something that equally resembles a puzzle game. Now that sounds strange, but enemies have mostly consistent spawns and patrol routes. They almost always spawn in the same spots and in the same amounts. If a player can memorize these, they can get through the vast majority of the encounters in the game without ever being spotted or ever having to worry about reinforcements. This will definitely come in handy when we start talking about Mein Leben. One defining characteristic that separates the Wolfenstein games from a lot of modern shooters is the lack of health regeneration. It has very basic health regen, like to the nearest 5 or 10, but it's not going to take you to full health. Gamers have been spoiled in recent decades with damn near every shooter having health regen of some kind. Machine Games has kept it old school with their Wolfenstein titles, requiring you to pick up health packs and pieces of armor to heal and repair yourself. This requires you to approach encounters more carefully since you can't just fall back and rely on continuous health regen like you can in most modern shooters. A few other gameplay elements to mention. Dual wielding is highly rewarding and enjoyable in Wolfenstein 2. I was probably dual wielding for 95% of my total playtime. You have 2 weapon wheels so you can create any combination of 2 weapons. The lean mechanic is the bread and butter of Wolfenstein 2's gunplay, especially on harder difficulties. This allows you to pop in and out of cover with L1, protecting yourself while you pick off enemies. It's a bit janky, but it does provide a safe way to survive even the hardest combat encounters in the game. One annoying quirk is that swapping weapons and throwing a grenade are mapped to the same button. Tapping R1 will toss a grenade, and holding it will bring up the weapon wheel. So make sure you commit before pressing the button. Multiple times I accidentally threw a grenade while trying to change weapons. BJ also has perks that can be leveled up, and these are really useful and usually reward a certain playstyle. Stealth killing Nazis will increase your crouch walk speed, which makes it easier to stealth kill more Nazis. Some of the other perks increase weapon ammo capacity, delay reinforcement response time, and increase damage on silenced weapons. This automatic leveling up system based on your playstyle is a unique approach. The game rewards you automatically for approaching combat in certain ways, and the rewards make you better at those things. There's no skill tree where the player needs to manually assign points outside of the weapon upgrades. This helps maintain the game's pacing and keeps your attention on the stressful encounters instead of tinkering in menus. We all know we're here for one thing and one thing only, and that's the Mein Leben trophy. There is nothing else in this trophy list that even comes close to Mein Leben. As I mentioned in the intro, Mein Leben is a mode that's unlocked once you beat the game the first time. In this mode, there are no saves, no checkpoints, no backups, no second chances. If you die, you start over from the beginning. This was about a 5-hour run for me, so it is not a short game considering how slowly you'll be going through most areas. The difficulty of this mode is multifaceted. On one hand, it's extremely hard to sit through this fucking cutscene 20 plus times. And then this one. Every single time you fail a run, you have to sit through these cutscenes. Not only that, but the cutscenes consist of some vile and disturbing actions and dialogue that most players probably don't want to sit through more than once anyway. These aren't happy cutscenes, and I can't imagine that hearing and seeing them 20 plus times is good for the human psyche. This part alone is already going to annoy most trophy hunters. This part isn't difficult in the same sense that we're about to talk about, but it's still a mental challenge. It's literally just time wasted sitting there waiting. You almost get the sense that Machine Games did this intentionally to rub it in your face with each failure, making you think about your mistakes before giving you another chance. This gave me flashbacks to Max Payne 3, which has unskippable cutscenes riddled throughout the game. In Wolfenstein 2, thankfully it's mostly the first 30 to 40 minutes or so that's the most annoying. But as annoying as those unskippable cutscenes are, the true difficulty of this mode is the undeniable reality that it's the hardest difficulty and you can't die once. This makes every encounter literal life and death for BJ. You have to approach every encounter with a different mind state than you would with a normal run on the hardest difficulty. You can't just rush in, try something, learn from a failure, and try again. You need to already have a deep understanding of the game's mechanics as well as each enemy encounter before even attempting Mein Leben. You need to memorize how many enemies spawn and where, and know how to get through or past them. Every single soft alert raises your heart rate as you beg the game, please don't see me, please don't see me. Because you know setting off an alarm right now will have you surrounded by enemies in seconds, potentially flushing the last 4 hours of playtime down the drain. There are so many ways to fail a run, and danger is all around you pretty much every second of the run. Alerting a commander is an easy way to get killed, not only because they can shoot you in the face with a rocket pistol, but they will very quickly have the room flooded with enemies. Falling off the map is also a possibility, in multiple levels. Not having your guns reloaded or not being ready for enemies is also a quick way to get killed. Throwing a grenade uphill or to an upper level is extremely stupid and is a great way to kill yourself when the grenade falls back down to your feet. Standing out in the open or not knowing what kinds of enemy reinforcements are about to appear is also a common way to die. In this particular run, I wasn't entirely familiar with the encounter. I let an enemy get behind me. I activated their trap card basically 20 minutes away from the end of the game, and this stupid mistake cost me about 5 hours. Most popular strategies for Mein Leben involve stealthing through as much of the game as possible and only going loud when absolutely necessary. A lot of encounters involve sneaking through an area and picking off enemies silently with either silent takedowns, thrown hatchets, or headshots with silenced weapons. This requires some understanding of enemy sightline distances and audio detection. Some enemies will hear even silenced gunshots nearby, so you have to know what enemies are nearby, what takedowns are safe to use against a particular enemy to avoid anybody hearing or seeing you, or seeing the body of an enemy that you just killed. All of this factors into the difficulty of getting through these areas using stealth. And even though Mein Leben will be a stealth-heavy playthrough, there are quite a few unavoidable combat encounters or situations where going loud is the easiest way to get through the encounter. The lean mechanic turns Mein Leben from something that is borderline impossible to something that is still incredibly hard, but doable with enough practice. You can peek out just far enough to shoot an enemy and then dip back into cover for protection. There will come times when many enemies are coming at you and you have to hide and funnel them towards you. When you can get the positioning down and lean in and out effectively, you'll be able to get through some intense firefights with minimal damage taken. In Mein Leben, you die very quickly, so you want to try and avoid any and all damage if you can. As far as weapons go, dual silenced machine pistols or normal pistols will be the go-to for stealth areas, allowing you to kill enemies silently. You'll need to be able to pull off stealthy headshots with these, some from quite a distance away. You'll also need some enhanced firepower for some of the encounters that just can't be avoided. Being unprepared for an encounter, such as not having the right weapon upgraded or reloaded, can ruin a run if you're at a spot requiring strict pacing. The biggest benefit the player has in a Mein Leben run is time. There are almost no timed combat encounters in the game. This means that if you're patient enough, you can inch towards the finish line, playing stealthily the entire way. It doesn't matter if the run takes you 3 hours or 10 hours. It also means that if you accidentally set off an alarm, you can retreat and sit safely in a corner or under a desk and wait for enemies to slowly come towards you. There are many encounters that are most effectively approached by waiting for enemies to come into your line of sight and then shooting them. Thankfully, the enemies are pretty stupid in this game. They'll just walk towards a pile of 10 bodies and right into your sight line for easy shooting. But most successful Mein Leben runs will have a mix of stealth and gunfights. Knowing when to use each is important in reducing your risk throughout the run. Finding weapon upgrade kits and upgrading weapons in the correct order will also be a crucial part of optimizing the run. Mein Leben is a difficult test of endurance. It is by far the longest permadeath run I have done. Not only does a run take a long time, but you'll likely need many attempts to beat it. A successful run can realistically take around 5 hours, and I've heard of people failing this dozens or even hundreds of times. As the run progresses, your heart rate will continue to increase. As you inch towards the finish line, you recognize you just spent the last 4.5 hours getting to this point, and if you make one small mistake, you'll have to start from the beginning and do it all over again. This trophy alone took me about 45 hours. I spent a lot of time studying video guides, probably 5 to 7 hours at least, and I did my best to memorize the entire run. Now I'm going to go over what I thought were the hardest parts of the Mein Leben run. I think most people who have completed the run will agree with these. They are just generally hard parts of the game, and this is where your hands start to get sweaty and your heart rate increases, but so does your focus. The first part of the game that causes your heart rate to increase is at the Roswell Overcommando section. This is a secret Nazi base where you must sneak in, plant a nuke, and get the out before it blows. Once you make it to the rocket train, the stealth path is pretty consistent. As long as you sneak for the entire thing and kill the correct enemies, you can easily get through it without being spotted. But you have to stick to the path and move quickly. Shortly after the rocket train section, you have to board this giant elevator, ride it to the top, and enter the Oberkommando base. The giant elevator section is tricky. You want to avoid being detected for obvious reasons, but getting on this elevator and riding it all the way to the top without being spotted is very challenging and takes a little bit of luck, I think. If you sneak over to this side and climb this railing and sit right on this red valve, you can jump to the elevator when it reaches the bottom, but don't miss like I did twice. And if you do it perfectly, you can make it to the controls and ride the elevator up without being spotted. If you do happen to get spotted in this section, prepare for an intense gunfight. Even popping in and out of cover, enemies can still hit you from pretty far away, so you have to be careful, precise, and focused to get through this section alive, if an alarm has been tripped. Once the elevator reaches the top, it's just a matter of sprinting to the next section, which is pretty easy. Once inside the Oberkommando base, you'll want to use stealth to sneak to the bomb plant location. After planting the bomb, you'll initiate a fight against one of the toughest enemies in the game, the Citadel. I don't know if that's how you say that, but this Nazi behemoth machine fires swarms of missiles at you no matter where you are, and is also equipped with a flamethrower, so you're f***ed from both short and long range. You have to take it out quickly and then carefully pick off the rest of the enemies from safe cover before ending the level. The second real nerve-wracking part of Mein Leben is the courthouse, which is roughly the half point of the run. Now, courthouse is probably the most infamous level of the game. At first glance, it seems impossible to get through this section. You start off with no weapons in the middle of a room, literally surrounded by heavily armed Nazis. You have Nazis in front, behind, and on upper levels behind you looking down at you. Thankfully, this is where waiting to do this platinum until 8 years after release minimized my frustrations with this level, since I was able to rely on already established strategies. I only failed this level one time, and it was honestly a fluke, but I used the same exact strategy each time and succeeded all but that one time. The key is to immediately sprint underneath this desk where this shotgun heavy weapon is just sitting there waiting for you, along with some grenades and a very useful health pack. Now, once in this position, it's a waiting game. Enemies in this game are so dumb that you can literally sit there and kill them one by one as they walk in front of you. After you kill about 15 enemies, things get more exciting. 2 super soldiers will drop down, you need to kill them, then kill a dog that spawns right after, and then you need to immediately drop the gun and leave your hiding spot, sprint upstairs, grab guns, armor, and ammo, and hold out in a defensive position here until all the enemies are dead. Once you get up here, it's pretty easy, but the 60 seconds from when those super soldiers drop to when you actually get up there can be pretty intense. This level is a good example of how the right strategy can make something that seems impossible more manageable and consistent with some practice and patience. Not long after the courthouse, you'll return to New Orleans during the nighttime, and this is the next nerve-wracking section. Unlike most other levels, the community seems to be split as to whether stealth is the right approach for this first section. I went with stealth because I prefer handling one enemy at a time, being extremely cautious and knowing where I can fall back to. But there are a lot of enemies in this section, and if you get spotted, it will be very difficult to get out alive. The key for stealth in this section is being able to hit headshots on some of these armored enemies that are patrolling, and then very carefully sneaking by the rest of the very tight patrol routes until you can sprint to the enemy despawn point. Once you make it there and the enemies in the first section despawn, you can collect your bearings, stock up on ammo and armor, and ride the Panzerhund through to the tunnel section. This tunnel section can also be very tricky. I made it here on a personal best run following a video guide, and there's a tough spot here where as you progress into the tunnels, there's a small group of enemies behind you. So you're in this long dark tunnel with enemies in front and behind you. Behind you, the enemies are just a handful, but all it takes is one to kill you quickly in a Mein Leben run. In front, you not only have snipers, but you also have a Nazi commander and a Citadel, one of the hardest enemies in the game. It's basically a death trap if you try and walk through it without avoiding detection. So I was spotted somehow and started getting shot from behind. I panicked, tried to survive, but ultimately died. Then I was given a tip on another safer strategy where you can kill the enemies in the preceding section first before moving into the tunnels. This is why it's super helpful to check multiple guides if you're struggling with the Mein Leben trophy. The strategy I tried initially looked simple and easy as I was watching it in a video guide, but I didn't execute it perfectly and it cost me the run. I ended up going with the safer, more reliable method from another guide, and it worked out perfectly. So if you're struggling in a section, check out some other guides. There may be an alternative way to get through whatever section you're stuck in. Once you make it to Venus, the real fun begins. Venus is arguably the most stressful level for a handful of reasons. For starters, there are some spots where you need to use stealth, but you're literally surrounded by enemies, including a lot of super soldiers. That means if you get spotted 9 times out of 10, it's GG's, have fun watching the cutscenes again, and good luck on your next attempt. I studied this level a lot before ever even getting to it. With it being so close to the end of the game, if you fail on Venus, it would be such a massive heartbreaker. So I was extremely careful when I finally made it here on Mein Leben. On my successful run, I somehow set off an alarm right at the start, and I had to quickly retreat and adapt, which brings me to a very important point. No matter how much you study and memorize, there will come times during a run where your plan doesn't work out. Something unexpected happens. Something that never happened in the previous 17 runs happens this time. Or you set off an alarm in a spot you assumed was easy, so now you have to adapt without knowing exactly what to do. At some point, you'll have to think on your feet and react quickly, maybe hit some quick headshots to stay alive, or sprint towards an exit and pray you don't get killed from behind. I managed to survive this fight by being extremely careful and slowly killing enemies from afar, and then I progressed to the next section. A complicating factor in the Venus level is these sections where you're outside. Since you're on the surface of the planet Venus, which is extremely hot, you need to cool your suit down with these cooling stations. You have to do this every couple minutes or you'll overheat and die. And some of these are in stealth sections. You need to be stealthy but also quick. And I came close. I had to sprint towards the end of this section and just barely made it there before overheating. I continued to stealth through most of the rest of the level, hands sweaty and heart rate spiked, and eventually safely made it back to Eva's Hammer to prep for the final mission of the game. The last section I'll go into detail on is the final fight of the game and the 2 encounters immediately before it. This is the big climax of the run. The last 5+ hours of being careful, patient, and hyper-focused have led to these final few encounters, which are some of the toughest in the game. 2 encounters before the final fight, you have this short but very dangerous section with a few super soldiers, 2 commanders, and a citadel. The key is to kill the initial 2 super soldiers from range, and then jump down and sprint to the other side of the arena into this small room. Now you're supposed to be safe once you're in here, supposedly. But as you'll see, you should always assume the worst, always assume there's another enemy lurking around somewhere, unless you get a cutscene or a dialogue that you know indicates all enemies are dead. Just look at how close I came to dying to 1 stray grenade, even inside this room I assume was safe. Even some of the dialogue indicators are not 100% reliable. After I kill the Citadel, I get the dialogue as if everybody's dead, but there's still a sole enemy left. It's the one who nearly killed me with the grenade a few minutes ago. It is so easy to die to a single enemy, especially when you don't know where they are, or you think all the enemies are dead. This was a very close call, and honestly, I would have been devastated by a death this close to the end, so thankfully I got a little lucky here. The next encounter after this isn't too bad as long as you play it safe. Kill the robot dogs as quickly as possible, and just don't keep yourself too exposed for too long, and you should be fine. Once through, you can finally board the elevator to the top of the Ausmercer for the final fight of the game. I was honestly never really worried about this final fight. I didn't practice it at all. In fact, I looked up the strategy while I was on my I Am Death Incarnate run, and I wasn't really concerned about it during any of my Mein Leben runs. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous as all hell as I rode up that elevator to the top. Once at the top, the first part of the fight involves quickly and safely taking out all 6 super soldiers, which spawn in pairs. After that, sprint down into the tunnels underneath where you just were, and this is where you turn into a spastic, dual-wielding killing machine. With dual ARs or shotguns equipped, I prefer shotguns, but if you run out of ammo, ARs are acceptable. The next 5 minutes just involves sprinting up and down, left and right, killing enemies as they approach you. You might be able to find a good camping spot down here, but I elected to keep it moving and rely on my reaction time for quick kills instead of playing it safe. After a while, enemies will stop coming down here, which could mean they're all dead, but you want to be very careful. The last thing you need is to get blasted from behind by a stray foot soldier while you're trying to take out the 2 bosses. Once you're sure all the standard enemies are dead, these final 2 enemies can be easily and safely dispatched by peeking out quickly and using the laser's charge shot. These guys can f you up instantly, so you need to be very quick and careful. Don't stay out in the open for too long, more than a second or 2. Once the 2 big guys are dead, you'll know you're safe and ready to proceed to the end of the level when you hear BJ taunt Frau Engel. This dialogue was such a massive sigh of relief, a huge weight off my shoulders, because you pretty much have the Mein Leben run completed at this point. All that remains is a final kill that is technically possible to fail, so it's not a guarantee, but if you just go through the motions and follow the path, it should be very simple and easy. Every single person who has completed Mein Leben understands the feeling of introducing your hatchet to Frau Engel's face and seeing that trophy pop. Dozens of hours of practice and studying have led to this success. At times, it feels impossible, but the more you practice and study strategies, you'll find yourself getting further and further into the run. You'll also get quicker as you get more experience with the earlier sections of the game, so runs get tighter and more efficient. When everything finally clicks and comes together for a successful run, the final payoff is extremely rewarding. I did not expect it to take 23 attempts across 8 days to beat this mode. On most days I was at least able to set a new personal best, but each failure became more and more frustrating. On attempt number 18, I made it to the last level only about 20 minutes from the end. I figured this specific encounter was going to be easy, so I rushed it and I died. It was 2 a.m., I was exhausted but focused, and I thought for sure this could be the run. But I learned the hard way you can fail a Mein Leben run at any point, and it was a crushing failure. Frustration turned into aggravation and then into annoyance. Going through those same cutscenes in the beginning half of the game 23 times, each big failure was devastating, and it would force me to take a short break from the game. But it didn't take long after I'd stopped playing before I'd want to try again. Because with each run, I was learning something. I knew I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Well, except for when I failed this easy jump twice in a row. But beyond that, I was learning more and more with each run. I was perfecting my version of the run. The version that I thought and hoped would be enough to beat this mode. With each failed run, when I later returned to that spot that caused me to fail previously, I adapted and almost always overcame it. But this is a very difficult challenge. One that will knock you down and point and laugh in your face every time you fail, which will be numerous. Like many of the games on the hard platinums list, it will require complete mastery of almost all the game's mechanics, tight reaction times, and extreme focus. Despite its difficulty, the fact that I was able to earn this trophy and platinum is further proof that all it takes is some dedication, practice, and patience. This platinum took me 76 hours, with around 45 of those hours spent on Mein Leben. And that does not include the probably 5 to 7 hours I spent studying video guides. I streamed all of my Mein Leben attempts from the first attempt before I really knew what I was doing, to the final successful run. I initially gave this a 10 out of 10 difficulty rating, but after thinking about it and remembering that I gave Devil May Cry 5 a 9 out of 10, I think the DMC5 Platinum was just as hard, if not slightly harder, than Wolfenstein 2. For that reason, I gotta give Wolfenstein 2 a 9 out of 10 also. Truthfully, I don't love the 10-point scoring system. I might have to revamp those ratings at some point, but I can still safely say that Wolfenstein 2 is in the top 2 hardest Platinums I've done for this series so far. Now, I just went into great depth on the Mein Leben trophy in the difficulty section, so I'll ignore that one here. There are a couple other trophies that sound grindy at first, but there are some extremely simple and effective exploits that let you get through them without breaking a sweat. There's a trophy for maxing out all perks. This sounds tedious, and even someone who has completed a playthrough may find that they still need a lot of kills to finish maxing out all the perks. Fortunately, perk progress saves immediately and doesn't reset when you load a save. Combine this with the ability to create a manual save, and you have an extremely quick and easy method of farming kills. Trying to get grenade kills? Throw a grenade towards a group of enemies, pause the game, save the game, let the grenade kill the enemies, then reload your save. The game will reload to the point after you threw the grenade, but before you get the kills, and it will keep leveling up your perk progress. This works with all the perks and allows you to quickly farm basically all of them in no time once you find a spot where you can create the loop. Another trophy that sounds grindy is the one to pick up 1,000 helmets. Helmets are armor pieces that you can pick up, but only if you're not already full on armor. However, you can stand at a helmet with full armor and repeatedly press square over and over, and eventually the trophy will pop. I didn't discover these tips on my own, I just found them while looking up guides. This is one big advantage, of course, of going for the platinum game that's 8 years old. There are a lot of collectibles, 213 in total, which is a lot for a mostly linear first-person shooter game. So you'll want to follow a video guide for those. There are also a couple missable trophies. Thankfully, they aren't hard, but if you miss them and you don't have a backup save, you'll need to do another playthrough. I had to spend about 2.5 hours speeding through most of the game a second time to get the I'm Machine Enough trophy. The last thing to mention here is that there are 2 trophies for getting a high score in a minigame on the Eva's Hammer. You need to get a high score in the shooting range and in the kill house. These are best done as early as possible because as you progress through the story and add more allies to Eva's Hammer, there's more people on the boat, and the high score that you need to beat in those 2 minigames increases substantially, making the trophy obviously much harder. This is a platinum trophy that I very likely would never have gotten if it weren't for guides. I watched a couple different video guides for Mein Leben because figuring out a successful Mein Leben run on your own must take dozens, if not hundreds of hours of trial and error. The guide from channel 100% Will is the primary one that I used with some slight modifications. There are quite a few guides now for this game in 2025, and I recommend you find a primary one you feel comfortable with, but check more than one. It's highly probable that you'll need to use a combination of different strategies based on your personal strengths, weaknesses, and probably risk tolerance. I also used a video guide to get all the collectibles and another for weapon upgrade kits. These went pretty quickly just by playing on easy, ignoring enemies, and following the exact path shown in the videos. Beyond these, you'll probably want to consult a trophy guide for the few missable and miscellaneous trophies. No question about it, 100%, this game is definitely in my top 10 hardest platinums. I severely underestimated how difficult this platinum would be, partly because I had heard for so long that it's not as hard as everyone said it was at launch. This lured me into a false sense of overconfidence until I actually started Mein Leben and realized how tough it was going to be. I still think it's entirely possible for anyone to get through this platinum if they are willing to practice and study, but it is undoubtedly a big challenge, and the majority of trophy hunters will be unable to muster the time and dedication needed to memorize the run or the patience to sit through multiple lengthy failures. I am skeptical that there will be many games in this hard platinums list that are harder than this one. And when I'm completely done with the series, I'll probably rank all 40 games based on difficulty, and I expect to see this one in the top 10. Getting the Platinum Trophy in Wolfenstein 2 will cover the overwhelming majority of what the game has to offer. The completion tracker in the main menu only keeps track of things that are already required for trophies, so the Platinum Trophy lines up perfectly with the in-game 100%. Strangely enough, there are also 150 readable items littered throughout the game that are tracked under the collectibles menu, but are not required for a trophy or for the in-game 100%. These come in different forms, like newspapers, postcards, journals. I tried to collect everything I saw during my first playthrough, so I ended up getting most of these without a guide. But I have no interest in hunting down the last 39 without a trophy reward. The game also has 3 DLCs with trophies, and they really went and put another trophy in each DLC to beat it on Mein Leben difficulty. This is trolling trophy hunters on a whole new level. Thankfully, the DLCs are nowhere near as long or difficult as the base game, and if you can get the platinum, you can probably get the full 100% trophy list without much difficulty. At the time of this recording, I have not yet completed all of the DLC trophies, but I definitely will soon, while the game's mechanics are still fresh in my head. Wolfenstein 2's Platinum Trophy is a grueling test of endurance thanks to the Mein Leben Trophy. It will require a ton of studying and practice, and you'll have to memorize enemy spawn locations and stealth routes. There is a lot that can go wrong and ruin a run, and multiple times I found myself in the middle of what I thought was a great run, only to have it ruined by a stupid, tiny mistake, bad RNG, or just flat out being unfamiliar with an area or encounter. But having said that, Wolfenstein 2 is a solid first-person action/stealth shooter with a kick-ass soundtrack from Mick Gordon. I actually had the game open at the main menu while I was surfing on my computer, and I could hear music coming through my speakers, and I thought it was a random music playlist I had going. And I'm thinking, damn, this song is an absolute banger, what is this? Turns out it was just the main menu music for Wolfenstein 2. I looked it up, and sure enough, made by Mick Gordon. In addition to great music, the gunplay is great, it's action-packed, and it's overall a pretty good game. But Mein Leben will make this a miserable experience for all but the most skilled FPS gamers or the most patient trophy hunters. From long, unskippable cutscenes to anxiously tiptoeing around Nazi compounds, praying you don't get spotted for 5 straight hours, this platinum is one to be proud of, if only you're crazy enough to commit to it. Alright guys, that's 2 more games off the hard platinums list, and they were 2 tough ones. In total, I've completed 8 out of 40 platinums on the list, and I can't wait to start the next set of games. Do you have either of these platinums? How was your experience compared to mine? You gotta let me know in the comments, and let me know what games you want to see me tackle in the future. I intend to conquer every platinum on this list no matter how long it takes. I also have the 3 next games planned out, and we'll be starting them soon. Until then, keep hunting, trophy hunters.